Which numbers matter? Should I be tracking downloads, listens, followers? And what's the difference between downloads, listens, and followers? That's the question a potential client came to me with last week. So, if you aren't sure how to know if your show is growing or doing well at all, here's what nobody tells you. None of those numbers, downloads, listens, or even subscribers, tells you whether your podcast is doing its job for your business. We spent most of our conversation walking through that very important reframe. So that's what you're learning in this episode. What to track, why it matters, and the tiny signals that someone's about to become a client. That's the good stuff. But I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't also teach you the bad, the invisible off-ramps where folks are slipping away and you don't even know it. Yes, you need to know how to find where your podcast funnel might be leaking.
You're listening to Podcasting for Financial Professionals, the show where smart business owners learn how to use podcasting as a serious growth tool, not just another marketing experiment. I'm Virginia Elder, podcast strategist and founder of Podcast Abundance. Since 2019, I've helped professionals stop guessing with their podcast and instead build a show that increases their authority, expands reach, and generates leads for their business. If you've ever wondered whether your podcast is actually generating leads or if you're just kind of publishing episodes and hoping for the best, you're not alone. And the issue usually isn't the content. It's that no one ever showed you what to track. Your podcast builds authority, warms leads, expands your reach, and creates opportunities long before someone ever hires you. But if you're only watching download numbers, you're missing most of the ROI. That's why I created the Podcast ROI Metrics Tracker, a free tool that helps you track 50 plus non-traditional metrics so you can finally see what your podcast is really doing for your business. Grab it now at podcastabundance.com/ROI-tracker. All right, let's get into the episode.
If you're a financial professional using podcasting to support your business, the real question is not how many people listened or how many downloads did this episode get. I know that's exciting, but the better question is what happened after they listened. Did they download something? Did they join your email list? Did they visit your website? Did they reply to an email? Did they talk to you or DM you and mention the episode? Because the podcast's ultimate goal is for them to enter into your business's ecosystem warmer, clearer, and more ready to trust you. That is where the real signal lives. So here we go. 5 tiny listener signals that can help predict your next client and how to find where your podcast funnel might be leaking. You do not need to become a data scientist to understand whether your podcast is working. You just need to stop measuring podcasting the way the entertainment industry does. Hello, we aren't celebrities and we aren't trying to become the next, big YouTuber or something. What we need to do is start measuring it like a relationship building system built for business. Let's start with the podcast funnel. First, what does a podcast funnel even mean? What does that look like? Okay, so starting at step 1 is discovery, right? So maybe they find your podcast directly, but more likely they found you somewhere else first. They met you at a conference. They heard you on another show if you're doing guesting. They see a clip on LinkedIn. A friend forwarded them an episode. They read your book. They heard your name from a trusted friend, right? So then step 2 is that they listen or watch your episode. Yes. Okay, but don't get too excited. Step 3 is, what do they do next? They might listen to another episode, maybe binge a few if your topics are exactly what they were looking for, which would be amazing. If they're interested, they might click somewhere. Hopefully you have a resource they can download. Maybe they'll click through the show notes and visit your website or follow you on LinkedIn. Everybody focuses on discovery, but it's in step 3, what they do next after listening to an episode, that makes or breaks your funnel. A funnel leak happens when someone shows interest, but there's no clear, compelling, low friction next step. And this is the disconnect I find in about 80% of the financial podcasts I review. You launched the show. The content is solid. You have a viable plan for interviewees. Your show's a reasonable length. There are so many things you thought of and did well, but there isn't a simple bridge from the episode into your business's ecosystem. Now, this bridge does not have to be complicated. Here's the easiest, lightest lift version. You have one free resource that solves a real problem for your listener. One form where they're entering their email address to receive that free thing, and then one short follow-up email that delivers the resource and tells them what to do next. That's it. That's a really great starting point. You do not need a 10 plus email sequence set up in the back end before you could even get started. You don't have to worry about segmenting, tagging, or automations at first. All of that just complicates things and creates an accidental barrier. Will those things help later? Absolutely. We do want to implement them in the future. But if they stop you from getting started, they are not helpful right now. So, circle back with me. Step 1 was discovery, how they figured out that you even exist. Step 2 was them listening to a podcast episode. Step 3 is what they do after listening. That's your lead magnet, the free helpful thing they can download. For many financial professionals, that might be a checklist, a calculator, some type of guide, worksheet, short video from you, or some decision-making resource, something to help them navigate, right? If you need help deciding what the best lead magnet would be for you and your brand, I'll help you in a one-to-one Zoom call. No biggie. The point is not to impress them with the most elaborate freebie in the world. The point is to keep the relationship going after your episode ends. Because without that bridge, you're just hoping that they listen to another episode at some point, and hope is not a strategy. Now that you know what a podcast funnel looks like, let's unpack the 5 tiny listener signals that predict your next client. Some of these are going to feel really obvious, but you still haven't thought of them, and others are going to be definitely something you haven't thought of. So the first tiny signal is that someone listens or watches multiple episodes around the same topic. This matters way more than one big download spike. A download spike can happen because the guest shared the episode and they have a big audience. A title was trendy or timely, or because you ran an ad that week, the same week the episode went live. Those higher download numbers are nice, but your download numbers do not indicate that that listener is moving toward working with you. Binge behavior is very different. If someone listens to 3 episodes about retirement readiness, Roth conversions, and tax planning before retirement, that signals that they're moving through a real decision process in their life. If someone watches several videos on divorce financial planning, asset division, and rebuilding after divorce, that tells you they're not just casually browsing. They are trying to understand a problem that might be personal and immediate and intimate. For another example, if a business owner listens to multiple episodes about cash flow, hiring, and preparing to sell, they might be trying to diagnose what is happening inside their business. This topic cluster listening behavior signals intent. And to track this, you would need to know which of your episodes cover related themes. So what this looks like practically is that wherever you keep track of your episodes, you have a tag or topic column. So you have more context than just the title, the episode number, the guest name, the air date, all those things that you track. You would have a topic tag as well. Then every month or every 60 days, you check the download numbers per episode in another column. And notice which topics create clusters of listening or repeated engagement. If your 3 episodes about divorce-related scenarios all show download increases at the same rate, while other episodes' download numbers seem kind of random, that's a signal. Look for themes and notice when older episodes keep resurfacing. That's why we're looking at the all-time download numbers. And especially pay attention when someone says, I listened to a few of your episodes about such and such, because that phrase tells you more than a download chart and tracking numbers ever will. Then make binging easier for your listeners. I did an entire episode about this. So this is where you would want to link those divorce topics together for them, link those retirement topics together for them. There's actually a really formulaic way to make your episodes bingeable. So learn how in episode 97, it's called the exact framework to create a bingeable podcast. To take it further, on YouTube, organize playlists by client problem or life stage. Then on your website, group episodes by topic instead of leaving them as one long chronological feed by post date. Shift out of just publishing episodes. You are creating pathways through intentional topics using the bingeable framework and then grouping them on the platforms where they're consumed. Remember, signal 1 is that they binge multiple episodes about related topics. The second tiny signal is when someone clicks from your episode, show notes, email, or social post, but does not take the next step. Now, that is not a failure. It is information. If people are clicking your website link, your LinkedIn profile, your lead magnet, or your calendar page, that interest exists. The leak might be happening on the page where they land. Maybe that page is unclear, or it just didn't load fast enough and they were busy and impatient. Maybe what's on that page, the language might be a little bit weak. Maybe the next step feels too big. Maybe they're being asked to book a call before they trust you enough. Maybe the free resource doesn't match the episode that they just heard. This is where you've got to be real honest with yourself. A listener who just heard a helpful episode may not be ready to book a consultation. That doesn't mean they're not interested. It means they need a lower friction, less scary step. This is where that free download matters. If you're sending everyone straight from a podcast episode to book a call with me, you might be skipping that nurture stage entirely. For some longtime listeners, that's fine. They're ready. They've been listening to your show for months. But most people need a softer, nearly risk-free step first. Now, a simple free resource lets them raise their hand without committing to a scary conversation. And again, this does not need to be complicated. If building out a full email subscriber platform feels overwhelming, It kind of is. So all you need is one landing page. Connect one form to it so people can opt in, deliver that one free resource, send one confirmation email automatically with a short message that says, here's what to do next. Maybe that is listen to this episode or, read my emails. That alone gives you a measurable action. Now, instead of wondering whether the episode worked and focusing on download numbers, you can see whether someone moved from podcast listener to email subscriber. If the links in your show notes are trackable, giving you the number of clicks, and you can compare that to the number of new email subscribers that month, that's a real signal. That's really useful data right there. The third signal is private engagement. This one is so sneaky, but it's absolutely huge for you. Financial topics are personal. We know this. They are not likely at all to comment on a social media post about divorce, debt, inheritance, retirement anxiety, cash flow struggles, tax problems, or financial shame, because it's revealing about them. There's risk involved with commenting. That doesn't mean that the content didn't land. They might consider replying privately to you. This is why email is absolutely huge. They might DM you. They might forward an episode to a spouse, a business partner, or a friend. If they do very bravely take that step to book a call, you might hear, I heard you talk about this on your podcast, or I feel like you were describing my situation. Those points of contact are huge trust signals. And it seems obvious when I'm saying it right now, but you might not have thought of it this way. The problem is that most professionals don't track these signals. You notice them, you feel good for 10 seconds, and then you move on. Okay, don't do that. What we need to do is make a note in your episode tracker spreadsheet. Document it in their profile, in your CRM, or in your project management system. This is an excellent use case for my free download, the Podcast ROI Tracker. This private engagement is ROI. On top of just tracking this third signal, track the language people use when they engage privately with you. If someone says, I listened to your episode about selling a business and it made me realize we need help, write that down. That should be next to that episode about selling a business. If someone says, my friend sent me your episode on college planning, write that down. If someone says, I've been listening for 6 months, well, definitely write that down. This is the invisible ROI of podcasting becoming visible and nearly tangible in your business. Because when that person is saying these things to you, they're much more likely to become a client. Private engagement is often more meaningful than public engagement, likes and comments and stuff on social media, especially in high trust professional services like yours. Public likes and comments are nice, but when trust is established, the real business begins. Okay, quick pulse check. Signal 1 was binge behavior, signal 2 was click through, and signal 3 is private engagement. We're moving on. You ready? This fourth signal might sound a little bit frustrating at first. It's that people keep asking you a question that you've already answered on your show. Your first reaction might be like, I already did an episode about that. And, you almost get tired of telling people, go listen to this episode. But instead of getting annoyed, observe and absorb this clue. If prospects, clients, or referral partners keep asking the same question, it may mean one of three things. First, they may not know that your episode exists. So continue to tell them about it. Refer nicely, right? Second, The title of that episode may not make it obvious that that episode answers their question. Maybe there's some adjustment or some SEO work needed. Third, the topic might be bulky and it needs to be broken up. This is where your content strategy can get a little more complicated. One episode may not be enough to really stamp out that frequently asked question. You might need a beginner version, a more advanced version, and then a decision stage version, all about that topic. These 3 strategic categories were explained in detail in episode 97 about engineering a bingeable show. So again, I really encourage you to listen to that episode. Here's a simple example. If you work with retirees, one episode about Roth conversions may not be enough. You might need one episode explaining what a Roth conversion is and who it's really great for, one about mistakes to avoid and maybe some issues that you've seen, and then one about how it fits into tax planning before retirement. And then maybe even another one walking through the questions someone should ask before deciding whether to pursue a Roth conversion. So you see how we strategically made like 4 episodes there about one topic that you might get a lot of questions about? So for example, if you work with business owners, one episode about cash flow might not be enough. You may need episodes about cash flow warning signals, profit versus cash, when to hire, when to cut expenses, and how to think about marketing investments. Repeated questions are not a sign that your audience is not listening. They're not a sign that, potential clients don't care about your podcast. They are often a sign that the topic matters enough to become a content cluster. And content clusters are what make your podcast bingeable, searchable, and useful inside your sales process. Plus, if you create those clusters, then we go back to signal 1, and now you're starting to see how everything connects. The 5th signal is one of the strongest and most obvious, but it might take you the longest to get there. Signal 5 is when your discovery call shifts from pricing and how we work and are you the right fit for me, and becomes a deeper conversation where it feels like they already know you. The most obvious tell here is that somewhere in the conversation, this new prospect that you don't know from Adam mentions your show and starts telling you things about you. They listened, they watched, they downloaded your free thing, they get your emails, they've been here a while, following. This is where it's no longer a question of, did the podcast create this lead? Because yes. So we shift toward, how did the podcast support this person becoming ready to have a conversation with me? Because in real life, people rarely move from stranger to client in one clean step. They may discover you through a referral and then listen to the podcast. They might see you on LinkedIn, download your free thing. They might attend a workshop or a webinar of yours and then binge your episodes. They might hear you on another podcast and then visit your website and discover your show. The podcast may not be the first touch point, but it most often is the trust deepening touch point. So here's a practice I want you to implement immediately. When someone books a call, in addition to the "how did you hear about us" question, I want you to ask specifically, what content of ours have you consumed before today? How they heard about you is still very useful, but it only gives us the first, most obvious touch point. Ask what they consumed. Then they might say, oh, I listened to 5 of your podcast episodes, or I watched a few videos, or I've been a subscriber on your YouTube channel for a while, or I've been getting your emails for a year. Now you know which piece of your content generation efforts helped prepare them to be sitting in front of you today. So the fifth signal is that they literally mention your content in a discovery meeting or call. So now that we have talked through the signals, let's talk about where the funnel usually leaks. The first leak happens when the episode doesn't hook them. This usually means the topic's too broad or the title's not specific enough. They were interested in the topic, but when they clicked play, they didn't get exactly what they needed. Maybe the content was too high level and they've heard that advice before. For whatever reason, their reaction was just meh, and they didn't stick around. The second potential funnel leak is when the episode is helpful, but it didn't guide them into the next step. They learned something, appreciate the content, but it wasn't necessarily clear how your firm helps or what problem you solve or at what point they should call you. The third leak is when the call to action is unclear, buried, or too aggressive. If the next step is hard to understand or too complicated, trust me, they will not do it. Like if your lead magnet is hard to find, for example, they'll look for it for about 5 seconds and then abandon ship. Alternatively, if the next step feels like too much too soon, they're going to back off and delay that step a little while. The fourth leak happens when the lead magnet does not match the episode. If the episode is about preparing for retirement, but the free resource is about general budgeting, that bridge is pretty shaky. They want a resource that helps them plan for retirement because that's what they just listened to and that's what they clicked into. So when they're served a budgeting resource, that disconnect is a complete turnoff. They might even start to wonder where there are other disconnects like that within your service. So not a good look overall. The fifth most common leak happens right after they sign up to get your free resource. If your listener downloads the resource and then they never hear from you again, you've captured the email but abandoned the relationship. This is why the podcast episode, lead magnet, and email follow-up should feel like one continuous conversation. The episode creates trust, the lead magnet gives them a useful next step, and then the email continues the relationship. That's the system. And again, start simple. One episode points to one relevant resource. One resource leads to one short email. One email points them to the next helpful piece of content or the next appropriate action, whatever that is. You can add more emails into like a welcome sequence, and you can make everything more complicated later. But right now, just make those first simple steps work. Okay, we talked about the signals and the leaks. So what should you track? Which metrics really matter for your business? Downloads, video views, and subscriber count are all top-level numbers. Track them, but realize that they are telling you your reach or exposure. It's like saying, I spoke on stage in front of 1,000 people. Okay? Now, those 1,000 people aren't all going to become clients. So if you want to understand whether your podcast is working for your business, the more useful signals are lead magnet downloads. That also shows you your email subscribers. This is the number one easiest and most obvious growth signal that your podcast is working for your business. After that, you could get creative. Here are a few ideas. You can track podcast mentions during calls. Track email replies after you've promoted an episode. You can track LinkedIn profile views or connection requests after guest appearances or maybe after you post a clip. You can track consultation bookings after high intent episodes. You can track referrals where someone says, I sent this friend your episode. You can track YouTube retention on specific segments within your episode. You can track repeated questions from prospects. You can even track older episodes that continue creating conversations months later. That's a great signal that you should continue doing episodes about that topic. Now, your tracking doesn't have to be perfect, but you do need a system and a dashboard where you can see changes over time. This is exactly why I created the podcast ROI tracker, because your podcast is probably doing more for your business than what your download numbers are showing. You need a way to capture the authority, the relationship, and the signals that are just super easy to miss if you're only looking at your podcast host account and, focusing on download numbers. Now, the goal is to make the trust you're building and your momentum visible. So here is the lightweight system I recommend as far as tracking your podcast growth for the ROI tracker. So once a month, okay? Sit down for 20 minutes, maybe even not that long. Review what happened around your podcast. Ask yourself which episode created the most response, which topic led to clicks, replies, or conversations, which episode prospects mentioned on calls, which call to action was completely ignored, which free resource matched the content. Ask which topic deserves a follow-up episode. That's it. You do not need a full quarterly board meeting with yourself. You need a short monthly review that helps you analyze and make better decisions around the podcast. This review will tell you what to repeat, where to refine, what to stop doing, and what to turn into a deeper series. It will also help you stop making emotional decisions. Instead of saying, I'm not getting enough traction, I don't think the podcast is working, you can say, this episode had fewer downloads, but it led to 3 email replies and 1 consultation. That's a very different conclusion, and you walk away feeling very differently about your show. So your next client is probably not going to show up after a big spike in your download numbers. That is the overall summary of what you're going to take away today. Instead, keep your eyes peeled for the listener who clicks 3 links, downloads a guide, listens to 5 topic cluster episodes, and waits 6 months before booking a call, because that's what they do. This is why tracking and metrics matter. The metrics don't care what your ego wants, which is those big download numbers. And I'd never advise you to obsess over every number, because that would make podcasting feel more complicated than it needs to be. Measurement matters because it helps you understand where the trust is forming and where your listener journey needs a little extra. Now, if your podcast is not creating business results yet, it may not mean that you're too boring, you're not hitting the right topics, or not marketing the show well enough. It may mean the bridge from your episode into your business is missing or too complicated. It may mean the right people are listening, but you haven't made it easy enough to enter into your business's ecosystem. So start there. Create that one clear next step. Track the small signals, review them monthly, and let the data guide your content instead of letting your anxiety affect your next episode. You'll start to see the trends and notice the leaks. And this is how you begin turning listener attention into measurable relationship movement.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Podcasting for Financial Professionals. Before you go, make sure you're actually measuring what your podcast is producing. Not by vibes, not by download spikes, but by the actual outcomes it's creating. Authority, visibility, and leads for your business. Your podcast is doing more than you think. You just need a way to see it. That's why I created the Podcast ROI Metrics Tracker, a free tool that helps you track the real return your podcasting for business is creating. From authority and visibility to leads and opportunities across many categories. Download it right now at podcastabundance.com/ROI-tracker.